Hi everyone, this is Sharan. Welcome to my channel. This is about learning data science in 100 days series. So far in the first 7 days, we have covered the installation of the tool Anaconda, as well as we have learned how to use Jupyter Notebook. And we also have covered basic Python programming that is required for data science. Python as a programming language is much more detailed. You can spend a lot of time to learn Python much deeper, but what we have covered is just enough for doing a data science project. So next one, we are going to see about Pandas library. So before going into today's topic, I just want to start with a quick data fact. It would be an interesting data fact. So today's fact is just 0.3% of light that is falling into the Sahara Desert is enough to produce electricity for the whole of Europe. So if we have enough solar panels, imagine how clean the energy would be. Okay, now going into the today's topic about Pandas library. So why do we use Pandas? Can't we just use Python to directly read the data from the files and do various operations that is required? We can definitely do. We can directly read data from a file from any source using Python. But why we use Pandas library here in the first place is because it's much more faster, efficient. It has a lot of features like you see on the board that helps in a lot of activity very specific to a data science project. For example, it has lots of functions that helps in cleaning up the data. It has lots of features to merge different data sources, and some of the operations are like it helps like in identifying the unit data in a data set. It supports lots of mathematical operations. It helps us in better visualize the data. It supports multiple file formats and so on. So these are all the reasons why we are going to use Pandas library, and for reading the file and doing various operations, and even for doing the data exploration. Okay, so now let's get into the tutorial and then see how to create a data frame using Pandas library and how to start various basic operations. Come on, let's go. Moving into the tutorial video, so far we have seen the importance of Pandas on data science project. So we have seen that it's much more faster and efficient, and it helps us in doing a lot of operations such as cleaning up the data, performing aggregation, joining or merging the data from different sources, and so on. So we understand that Pandas is really important. So in the first day of Pandas, we are going to learn about how to create a data frame, how to read values from a file, and how to write a data into a file, as well as how to perform some of the basic operations on a data frame. Okay, so now before going into the details, what is a data frame? So a data frame is nothing but a two-dimensional data. So it can be simply a table which has some columns as well as rows. So that is defined as a data frame in Python Pandas library. So now let's get into it. So as you see on my screen here, so you can see that these are some of the advantages of using the Pandas library, and that's why we choose to learn about it, so that in any data science project, a lot of effort is being spent on data exploration to understand the data much more better, to do various operations on the data. So in order to make all those activities much more efficient and faster, we need to use Pandas library in Python. So now let's see how to before going into the details, I'm just going to clear it. Okay, so now in order to use the Pandas library into our code, we need to import the Pandas library. So what we can do is we can use import Pandas, and we say as PD. So every time when we want to call the Pandas library, instead of mentioning it by its full name, when we give so this is a name that can be used, an alias name that can be used whenever we want to call the Pandas library. So let me just execute this. So now if you see here, so the Pandas library is already installed, so I'm able to import it. If in case you get an error while executing this particular line, what you need to do is you need to close this window, go back into the Anaconda command prompt, and do an pip install pandas. And once the pandas library is installed, and if you open Jupyter Notebook and then start executing this should be working fine. So most likely there shouldn't be any issues, but if you have any issues, like there is nothing to worry about. You just need to install the pandas library into your environment where you are working on. So now let's see how to create a particular data frame. So what we can do is we can use the pandas library. So we are using the alias name pd and dot data frame. So what happens is this dot data frame will ensure that whatever data we are passing here within the brackets will be converted into a data frame, and this will be assigned to the variable here. So now let's see what happens when we do this one. We are not passing any value to this data frame. We are just passing an empty value. When I execute this, so as you see here, it says that the data frame is empty. It says that this particular data frame doesn't have any data. It has like no columns as well as no index. So now what we can do is we can see what happens when we pass on when we convert and list into a data frame. So let's see. So this is a particular list. I'm just going to print this particular list and then see what's happening. So if you see here, the list is being printed. So now let's say I want to convert this list into a data frame. So as we saw, a data frame is two-dimensional. It needs to have a column as well as it needs to have some rows to it. So when I try to convert this into a data frame, and then let's say I'm going to print the data frame. So here what I'm doing is I'm calling pandas library, and I'm using dot data frame so that I can convert whatever value I'm passing here into a data frame. So now I'm assigning this into a variable here. I'm going to print that particular variable. So now if you see here, what I passed is one dimensional. It's simply an list of elements. So when I try to convert that list of elements into a data frame, what happens is it is being transformed into a column, and we can see the name of the column is assigned as 0 because we didn't pass any name to it, as well as there is an index that is created from 0, and with each element it is being incremented with 1. So that's how we can use dot data frame function to convert any data into a data frame. So that one thing that needs to be kept in mind is a data frame needs to be two-dimensional. Like it needs to have a column and it needs to have some values to it. So if we don't pass, like it will be created, like as you see here, an empty data frame can also be created and values can be assigned to it maybe later. But when we convert and list into a data frame, this is what happens. So now let's see when we have a list of lists and what happens when we try to convert that into a data frame. So let me just print the company's variable and then see what's happening. So as you see here, so we are printing the list, and this list has multiple lists within it. Like each element of this list is a list by itself, so which has two values to it. So when I try to convert this into a data frame, so I'm calling pandas and I'm using dot data frame in order to convert the values that I'm passing to a data frame. So I'm passing this variable here. In addition to it, what I'm doing is I'm also passing a name to the columns. So each list has two elements to it. So what I'm doing is I'm passing on two values as the name of the columns. So when I try to print this data frame here, so what would happen is, so as you see, what happens is each element of this list, the first element is considered as the first column. The second element is being considered as the second column, and the name that we passed on as the name of the columns is being assigned to the name of those columns, as well as there is a default index which starts again with 0 and goes on. So this is how a list of list is being converted into an data frame. So let's say in addition to this, let's say I want to add an additional column. So I'm just going to copy this and then replicate it. Okay, so now let me also give a name of the column. So now if you see the third element that we added here is being created as an third column. So that's how we can create a data frame. So as you see here, there are three elements, but I am trying to pass on only two values to the name of the column. So when I do that, there is an error that is throwing up saying that there is two columns passed, but the passed data has three columns. So it's most of the errors would be like easier to understand. But even if you don't understand, like if you copy and search it maybe in Stack Overflow, you should be able to get an answer to any of your questions. So now by passing the name for the third column, what happens is the error goes off. So that's how we convert a list of list into a data frame. So the next one is, let's say we have a dictionary where we have a key as well as value. What happens when we try to convert that into a data frame? So again, we call Pandas library, and we use .DataFrame to convert the data into a data frame. So what happens here is the key becomes the name of the column. So here Apple as well as Amazon is the key. So if you see here, they become the name of the columns, as well as whatever values of those key that we have passed is being considered as the values of those columns. So let's say now I'm trying to add a few more values to that to those each of those keys. So when I try to execute this one, so as you see, what happens is that the key remains the name of the column, and whatever values that we pass is being added as a new row to it. So here the default index is again being followed. The default index starts with 0 and incremented with 1 with like every additional row. And as we keep on adding values to it, a new row would be created in our data frame. And so this is like an additional like very similar to what we have done. But what we are doing here is I'm passing on a default like index. Like instead of having the default index which starts with 0, I'm passing on the values for that index. So when I execute this one, so if you see here, instead of having 0 as well as 1, whatever index value that we have passed here has been assigned here in our data frame. So that's how we create a data frame. So let's say we have a list of values, or we have a tuple or sets, and we want to transform or convert that into a data frame so that we can join that data into a larger database. Let's say we have a list of date of births or customer numbers, or let's say we have a dictionary where we have the employee names as well as various employees and maybe date of birth, and we want to join it with our main data source. What we do is we can use the .DataFrame function to convert that into a data frame, so that it can be joined with maybe with any other data source that we might be interested in. So now moving on to the next one, let's say we want to read the data from a file. Like how do we read it? So we can use Pandas in order to read the data from a CSV file, and like when we use Pandas, what happens is when we read it, it will be read as a data frame. So as you see here, what happens is we use PD, we call the Pandas library, and we use read_CSV function to read the CSV data. So here what's happening is that there is a data folder. So whatever the code here is present, that's the root folder. So in the same folder there is one more additional folder called data. So if you come here, so we can see there is a folder called data. So this is our script. So when I go into this, it has an CSV file and text file as well as one more additional file. So let me go back here. So what I'm doing is I'm going into the data folder, and then I'm going to read the data from the sample1.csv. So by executing this, what happens is I'm reading the file, and I'm assigning that into a variable called csv_df, and using here, like using .head, I'm printing the top 5 rows of it. So if I go into this CSV file, if I click this, so you can see the values now is being printed here. So the first row is then considered as the name of the column, and the other ones are considered as the values of those columns, and we don't have any index here. But when we use DataFrame, by default index will be created. So the first row is being assigned to an index of 0, and it is getting incremented with every additional row. So that's how we read the data from a CSV file as a data frame. So now let's say we have a data that is in a text format or in a different format. So what we can use is we can still continue to use read CSV, but if the data is not stored as .csv, let's say if it is in .text format, maybe what we need to do is we need to pass on an additional parameter, and we need to clearly mention what is the separator, how the columns are being separated from each other. So here we have one more data. So I'm going to close this, and then if we go on to the sample1.txt, so as you see here, there is the same data, but here the delimitation is tab. So I'm going to read it. So what I'm doing is I'm just mentioning the separator, like what's the separator in that particular file. So I'm mentioning the tab is the delimitation. So when I try to do this one, like what happens is it's able to read the data from the text file, and it's pretty much same. So the first row is considered as the name of the column, and all the ones are the values in the particular column, and it's also been indexed now. So now we have understood how to read the data from a file. Like the file could be in different formats. It could be in Excel, it could be text, it could be CSV. We can also read the data from an database database table as well. So we will be covering into those details later. So for now, like reading the data from a CSV file is good enough for us to progress with the topics that we are going to learn. So now let's say we want to write and data frame into one file. So this is also very important, like reading as well as writing. So reading is important because when we work on a data science project, the data would be present in a file, or it would be present in a database table. So we need to read it, we need to do various operations, maybe we need to build a model. So let's say we built an predictive model to identify customers who are most likely to churn. So what happens logically next is, so this particular model would be, this particular output of the model, like customers who are going to churn, will be supplied to a different team, like let's say a marketing team. So what happens is usually, and marketing campaigns would be launched for those customers who are most likely to churn, so that they are stopped from being churned. So what would happen is the data that we pass on with the list of customers who are highly probable to churn would be supplied to an campaign system, and which would use those data to send out like marketing campaigns with offers to those customers to ensure that they remain happy and they don't churn off. So it's really important to save the data frame or whatever data that we are working on into an CSV file. So that can be done. So here, so what I'm doing here is I'm just creating an list and then converting that into a data frame here. So then in order to store that as an CSV file, so what we can use is we can use the data frame that needs to be stored. And when we do to CSV, what happens is this particular data frame that we are mentioning here will be converted, it will be written into an CSV file, and whatever value that we pass here would be the location of the CSV file. So let me execute this one and then see what's happening. So when I go here, so if you see here, this file is just created like few seconds ago. So if there is a file already present with the same name, it will be replaced with a new file. It will be deleted and it will be replaced. So if you have this file open, what would happen is Python would not be able to delete it, and hence a new file can't be created. So it might throw up an error. So maybe when you are executing this one, please ensure that this particular file is not open. So if you see here, the data that we have created is being stored into a CSV file, but what's happening is it comes up with a default index. So let's say we don't want this index, we want to remove this index and make it much more cleaner. So then what we do is, we say index is equal to false. So by mentioning index is equal to false, what happens is we make sure that the index doesn't come up. So here I'm using encoding as UTF-8. UTF-8 is a character encoding which is as compact as ASCII values. So when, let's say, our data set has only ASCII values, so then maybe you can make use of UTF-8 encoding. So this is an optional parameter, so totally like not required. So even without this particular parameter here, this statement would still execute and would still work. So let me execute this one and see what's happening. So now again a new file has been created. So let me open it. So if you see here, this is much more cleaner. It doesn't come up with the index. So the index has been removed before writing the data into an CSV file. So that's how we write a data frame into a CSV file. So these are all like very important concepts which would be like almost will be used in any data science project that you are going to work on. So now next, let's see some of the basic operations that can be performed on a data frame. So as usual, like I'm going to just create a sample data frame, and this is how to print the top 5. So when we use tail, what happens is it will print the bottom 5 by default. So if we pass on a specific value, let's say 2 here, so what would happen is it would just print the last 2 values here. So these are some of the basic functionalities of that can be performed on a data frame. So the next one is, let's say we want to transform the data frame. We want to transpose the data frame, so we can use just .t, so it will be pivoted. So when I execute this, so we had a companies as well as sequence as the columns. So now what happened is it has been transposed into rows. So transpose, so these are some of the operations that can be performed on a data frame, which would be really useful in some of the projects. So the other operations that can be performed are, so let's say we want to understand the number of dimensions, so we can use ndim to see what's the dimension. So here it says 2, so it has 2 dimensions. It has columns as well as it has rows. So let's say I want to understand the shape of that particular data frame. So here the shape is 7,2, which means that it has 7 rows and 2 columns. And let's see what happens when we use dot size on a data frame. So when I use dot size, so it gives us the size. So it has 7 rows and 2 columns. So 7 into 2, like there are 14 elements. So the size of the data frame is 14. So these are all some of the basic operations that can be performed on a data frame. So I hope you would have learned something new today. So the topics that we have covered so far is why Pandas is really important on a data science project, and how can we create a data frame from a list or set or a dictionary, and how to read data from a file as a data frame, how to write back into a file, as well as how to do some basic operations on a data frame. So there are few examples for you to try it out by yourself. So maybe if you can try out all these exercises, it will help you in understanding the concept much more better. So the more you practice, the more strong you become. So I hope you have learned something new. So if you have learned something new, please give a thumbs up, as well as subscribe to my channel to follow on like similar videos. And if you think this might help any of your friends, please feel free to share it with them, and let them also join our journey of learning data science in 100 days. Bye for now. See you on the next day.